The old fishing trawler, the Wraith, was a vessel of dread. It creaked and groaned as it sailed through the churning waters of the North Atlantic. Shadows danced in the dim light of the cabin. The flickering glow of a single oil lamp did little to pierce the gloom.
His eyes narrowed against the gloom, focused like a man who had faced the sea longer than he had faced the skies.
The sea holds many secrets, some best left undisturbed. Old Man Finnegan, the ship's cook, was a veritable encyclopedia of maritime lore. He would regale us with stories of ghost ships, krakens and mermaids. One particularly eerie legend was that of the Wraith itself, said to be named after a spectral ship that haunted these waters. Whether these stories were true or not, they served as a reminder of our mortality at the mercy of the sea. The sea is a jealous mistress, demanding respect and often claiming a piece of your soul. I remember the first time I felt truly alone out on the water during a fierce storm. Waves crashed over the bow, threatening to swallow us whole. In those moments, you realize the insignificance of human life against the raw power of nature. We emerged from the storm battered but alive, reminded of who was in control. It was during one of those long, restless nights at sea that I first met George. George, with his unkempt hair and weary smile, was among the first to greet me. He had a quiet intensity about him, a sadness that lingered in his eyes. In that isolated world of salt water and despair, we formed a bond. He had a way of listening without judgment, his silence more comforting than any words could ever be. Tragedy had etched its way into George's life.
I tried to rein in the chaos by abandoning booze, but nothing seemed able to drown out my internal storms. We often engaged in philosophical discussions while casting our nets, pondering the dark abyss of the sea that mirrored the depths of his thoughts. We're all just adrift out here, searching for meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it.
The sea had a way of stripping away pretense, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath the surface. Sometimes I caught glimpses of hope in George.
I imagine opening a bookshop, a place where I could lose myself in the written word and share my love of literature with others. In those moments, his eyes would light up with a spark of something akin to joy. But these glimpses were fleeting, like sunbeams breaking through a canopy of dark clouds. The sea had a way of claiming its own, and I couldn't shake the feeling that George was destined to remain tethered to its depths.
On that fateful trip, I sensed something was amiss, a shift in George's demeanor as the salt haze of pre-dawn descended upon us.
You know they're out there.
But that night I saw a change, a smile that hadn't touched his lips in years. It wasn't a smile of joy. When he re-emerged from the shadows, his eyes gleamed with something I struggled to define. Something was deeply wrong.
What's out there?
I asked, longing for him to clarify whatever delirium had claimed him.
I'll show you.
His expression was intense. For a heartbeat, I imagined being pulled into the depths of his troubled mind.
I can hear their singing.
His words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. The other crew members dismissed George's claims, but fear flickered in their eyes. I found him standing at the edge of the ship, silhouetted against the vast blackness.
George,
I called hesitantly, shuffling closer, feeling the icy mist cling to my skin.
They're here, he whispered, a soft tremor in his voice.
His words were nonsensical, yet they dripped with conviction.
Who?
He pointed into the obsidian darkness.
The angels. I can hear them calling.
His words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the silence of the night.
I can't hear anything, George.
My voice sounded small, insignificant against the vastness of the sea.
"They're singing a song," he insisted, his eyes reflecting a longing I didn't understand.
The next morning dawned grey and grim. As the crew gathered for breakfast, I noticed George was absent.
Unease spread among us as we searched the cabins and spaces. We called his name, our voices echoing hollowly through the ship's cramped corridors. Eventually, we succumbed to the nightmare. George had vanished. The sea had claimed another soul.
It was then that we discovered his boots resting on the deck, suspiciously dry.
"Maybe he jumped," one of the deckhands offered, his voice barely a whisper.
We all knew the power of the sea to unravel a man's mind, but this felt different. This felt deliberate. Whispers of madness rippled through the crew. Some spoke of George's strange behavior, his claims of hearing angels. Fear, potent and contagious, began to take root in our hearts. As we huddled on the deck, our faces etched with a mixture of grief and terror, our gaze fell upon something impossible. Leading away from George's boots, a trail of peculiar footprints marked the deck.
Each print was a perfect circle, smooth and slightly indented, as if made by a large fleshy snail.
One of the crew, a young man named Finn, swore he had heard George speaking to the sea the night before. He thought he saw mermaids, he exclaimed, his voice high-pitched with terror. The sea had taken George not through brute force, but through something far more insidious. The Wraith, it seemed, was more than just a ship. It was a conduit, a bridge between our world and the realm of the unknown. The captain ordered us to resume our duties. We obeyed, our movements mechanical, our minds numb with fear. But even as we worked, our eyes darted nervously towards the sea, searching the waves for any sign of George or whatever had taken him. The Wraith sailed on, slicing through the waves, a vessel of sorrow and dread, forever bound to the secrets it carried within its hull. A month crept by, each day a struggle against the oppressive memory of George's disappearance. The sea, once a source of livelihood, now felt like a constant threat. Then, one day, the fog lifted. It was during that brief respite that Justin joined our crew. He was a young man, barely old enough to shave, his face still carrying the bloom of youth. He brought with him a breath of fresh air, a reminder that there was still life beyond the shadow of the Wraith. As the days turned into weeks, Justin settled into the rhythm of life aboard the Wraith. He was a quick learner, eager to please, and his enthusiasm was infectious. For a while it seemed as if the shadow of George's disappearance had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism, but the sea, it seemed, was not finished with us yet. I stopped what I was doing, my heart pounding in my chest. Heard what? S3. Media, two people conversing urgently on a foggy deck, a person looking around nervously in the mist. I heard it.
A voice, a man's voice, calling for help.
I felt a chill run down my spine. The fog had a way of playing tricks on the mind, amplifying sounds, blurring the line between reality and imagination. But there was a sincerity in Justin's voice, a raw terror that I couldn't ignore.
"Did you recognize the voice?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady.
"No," he whispered. "But it sounded like it was coming from the water."
I exchanged a worried glance with the other crew members. They had stopped working, their faces etched with fear. The memory of George's disappearance hung heavy in the air.
"What's going on here?" he demanded. "Justin says he heard a voice," I replied, "a voice calling for help."
The captain's eyes narrowed, his gaze sweeping over the crew.
"Voices carry strangely on the water," he said, "especially in this fog."
His words did little to quell the growing unease. The Wraith had become a ship of suspicion. That night, as I lay in my bunk, unable to shake the image of Justin's terrified face, I heard it too. A faint whisper on the wind, a mournful cry from the depths of the sea. It sent shivers down my spine, speaking of madness and despair. The sea had claimed George, and now it seemed it was coming for us all. The usual banter was absent, replaced by a tense atmosphere. The captain, his face grim, said nothing. The Wraith sailed on, our hopes sinking beneath the waves. Days bled into nights. The fog became our constant companion. It swirled around the Wraith, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. We spoke little, the weight of unspoken fear pressing down on us. Each man was isolated in his own dread. Justin, haunted by what he had heard, grew increasingly withdrawn. His youthful vibrancy had dimmed. He moved like a spectre. The sea had sunk its teeth into his soul. One night, I sought him out. I found him on deck, staring out at the endless expanse of grey. He seemed lost in thought, dwarfed by the immensity of the sea. "Justin," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. He turned, his eyes startled, or perhaps the presence of anyone other than the whispers that haunted him.
"It's getting worse," he murmured.
Section 2, The Abyss Gazes Back. Reflections of Madness, he shuddered, pulling his threadbare jacket tighter around his thin frame.
"They call to me,"
he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, unsettling longing.
"They promise me peace, release."
I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that the voices were nothing more than the sea playing tricks on his mind. Section 3, A Pact Unbreakable, Surrender to the Deep. The fog seemed to press in on us then, a suffocating blanket of despair that threatened to consume us whole. I could feel its icy fingers tracing the edges of my sanity, whispering promises of peace, of release. "We have to warn the others," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but even as I spoke the words, I knew it was futile. The sea had already claimed us. It was only a matter of time.
"It's too late. They won't believe us. They'll think we're mad."
He was right. We were already tainted by the sea's madness. Our words would carry no weight, no truth. We were as lost as George. Our fates sealed by the pact the Wraith had made with the deep. Section 4, Alone in the Maelstrom, the Final Descent. As the days turned into weeks, the line between sanity and madness blurred. The whispers grew stronger, more insistent. They wormed their way into our thoughts, our dreams. They promised us peace, release. All we had to do was surrender. I watched as, one by one, the crew succumbed to the sea's siren song. Their laughter became hollow, their eyes distant. They moved like sleepwalkers, drawn to the railing by an invisible force. The captain, his face etched with the weight of his responsibility, fought valiantly against the encroaching madness. But even his iron will began to crumble under the relentless pressure. The Wraith, once a vessel of purpose, had become our prison, a floating coffin adrift in a sea of madness, and I, the last one standing, could only watch in horror as the maelstrom consumed us all. A sea of whispers, the legacy of the Wraith. The sea, they say, holds on to its secrets. It whispers them in the howl of the wind, the crash of the waves, the mournful cries of seabirds. But sometimes it reveals its truths to those who dare to listen, those who are broken enough, lost enough to hear the siren song of the abyss. The Wraith, or what remained of her, was eventually found run aground on a desolate stretch of coastline. The rescue party found no survivors. The official report spoke of a rogue wave, a freak accident, the unpredictable fury of the sea. But those were explanations for the living, for those who clung to the illusion of order in a world governed by chaos. The truth, I knew, was far more unsettling. The truth lay in the empty eyes of dead fish scattered across the deck, in the tangled mess of fishing nets that resembled the grasping claws of some monstrous sea creature. The truth lingered in the faint ethereal hum that emanated from the ship's hold, a haunting melody that spoke of madness and despair. The Wraith, it seemed, had fulfilled its purpose. It had served as a conduit between worlds, a bridge between the mundane and the monstrous, and in the end it had claimed the souls of those who dared to sail upon its cursed decks. The unfathomable depths, questions unanswered. I often find myself drawn back to the sea. Its vastness both terrifies and compels me. I hear echoes of the past in the crashing waves, see fleeting glimpses of familiar faces in the swirling foam. Were the whispers real, or were they merely figments of our unraveling minds? Were we driven mad by the isolation, the relentless pressure of the sea? Or was there something more sinister at play? Did George find the peace he so desperately craved in the embrace of the deep? Or was his fate far more terrible to contemplate? These are questions that plague me. Questions that have no answers. The sea, like death itself, offers no explanations, no solace. It simply is. And in that vast, unknowable expanse, I find myself both terrified and strangely comforted. The sea took everything from me. My friends, my sanity, my faith in the world. But it also gave me something. A glimpse beyond the veil, a taste of the infinite. A knowledge that some things are best left undisturbed, some depths best left unplumbed. Alone on the tide, a sailor's requiem. I no longer sail on the Wraith. I doubt she sails at all, not anymore. Some say she was repaired, sold off, given a new name to outrun the whispers of her past. But I know the truth. The sea doesn't forget, and neither do I. Now I walk the shoreline, a solitary figure amongst the dunes and the gulls. The salt air stings my nostrils. It carries with it the memory of laughter and fear, of camaraderie and betrayal. I am both drawn to the sea and repelled by it, caught in its inexorable pull. I carry the weight of their memory with me. George, Justin, the captain, all of them lost to the depths. I am their witness, their keeper of secrets. The sea may have claimed their voices, but I will continue to tell their story. A cautionary tale whispered on the wind, a reminder of the power of the sea to both sustain and destroy. Into the blue horizon, a solemn salute. The sea is a harsh mistress. She demands respect and she exacts a heavy toll. But she is also a source of endless fascination, of profound beauty, of terrifying wonder. I've learned to fear the sea, but I have also learned to respect her power. As the sun sinks below the horizon, casting long shadows across the waves, I raise my hand in a solemn salute. To the lost souls of the Wraith, to the secrets buried beneath the waves, to the sea itself. For in its depths I know there is both beauty and terror, and sometimes the line between the two is as thin as a whisper on the wind.